Today is the village's awakening ceremony, where children receive their job classes. Everyone has high hopes for Errol because his mother is a famous sword princess and his father is an archmage, so they expect him to get a powerful class. But when it's Errol's turn, the priest touches him, and instead of seeing a job title, Errol only sees pure white. The priest is shocked. This almost never happens. It can only mean one thing: Errol has no class and will be permanently jobless. Classes are blessings that give people skills and a career path, so this is a huge deal. His parents and sister had been praising him all morning, convinced he'd get something legendary. Hearing that he's classless leaves them stunned. Still, they love him, so they start canceling their retirement plans and tell Errol he can live in their basement forever if he wants. But Errol refuses. He doesn't want to be a basement dweller. Everyone seems to think he is going to become a bum since he's classless, but he honestly doesn't think it's a big deal. Sure, it would have been nice to have gotten a cool job that would make him strong immediately, but he has still been learning how to use a sword with his mom for years at this point. And the fact that she hasn't accidentally killed him with her overwhelming force yet must mean he has been getting better, so he's not discouraged. Even if it's going to take more work than usual to achieve the same results as others, he is willing to keep trying until he becomes just as strong as his parents. Errol's family members are all happy to see that he hasn't lost hope yet, so they start glazing him, saying he will definitely become famous in the future. And Errol appreciates it, but he really needs to get back to training, so he heads out into the fields by himself. There, he hears the sound of swords clashing nearby, so he goes to check it out and spots two children from the village in the middle of a duel to test out their new sword classes. Soon enough, one of the boys notices Errol watching them from the corner over there, and they ask him what he's doing here since this isn't a place for a classless loser like him. Errol says there are no rules against him coming here to train, so he'd just like to practice in peace. But the kids seem really intent on establishing dominance over Errol, so they say they'll be nice and show him what a sword class wielder can do. The two of them begin sparring with one another again in front of Errol, and he is kind of impressed. Don't get me wrong, their technique is laughable at best, but Errol does think it's intriguing how effective sword skills really are. The first skill anyone with a sword class receives is called basic swordsmanship, and it allows you to swing a sword decently well, even if you've never held one in your life, which is clearly the case for these two. He thinks he might actually be able to get some good practice in if he goes up against them, so he interrupts and says he'd like to have a duel with them. The kids are offended by the fact that Errol thinks he would stand a chance against them, even though he is classless, so they agree to the match, but just to make sure, the first kid asks Errol if he has his divine protection. A divine protection is a blessing that everyone in this world is born with, and it basically creates a shield around your body to absorb damage up to a certain extent. Errol informs them that he does have a divine protection, and the boys are relieved to hear that since it means they don't have to worry about accidentally killing Errol during their duel. The first one steps up and charges at Errol, fully expecting to overwhelm him with his initial strike. But to his surprise, Errol is actually holding his ground really well. No matter what he does, he can't find a single weakness in Errol's technique to exploit. He signals for his friend to come over so they can jump Errol, but he sees it coming and jumps out of the way in time. Mostly because the second kid was yelling during his sneak attack. The swordsman class may have given them decent sword skills, but it can't do anything about plain old stupidity. So these two wouldn't be able to come up with a decent attack plan, even if their lives depended on it. Either way, he thinks this is a great opportunity to challenge himself by fighting two opponents at once, so he charges towards them. But within seconds he has already knocked them out, and it wasn't as hard as he thought it would be. Any reasonable person would have admitted defeat here, but the boys say they haven't lost yet because, no, that one didn't count. Just then, a red-haired child shows up, and he tells the two of them to stop whining because on a real battlefield, there are no second chances. Red hair seems to be pretty well known since the boy don't bother arguing with him, and as he walks up to Errol, he tells him that his skill with a sword is remarkable for a classless bum like him. But the only reason he won that match was because he was up against those weaklings. So now Red Hair wants to fight Errol to prove that he is superior. The boys inform Errol that Red Hair is the son of Captain Evans, the village's head guard, and Errol happens to know Evans since he used to show up at their house every so often to ask Errol's mom to help him hunt demons. But to be honest, red hair looks nothing like Evans, so Errol briefly considers calling him adopted, but he doesn't want to make him any angrier than he already is. Redhead is only doing this because he thinks his father is the greatest, but everyone else in the village says Errol's mom is stronger, which is true by the way, but Redhead can't accept that. He wants to make it clear that he isn't lazy like those two over there. He awakened his sword skills a year ago and has never skipped a single day of training, so even though he is young, he has already attained some intermediate level sword skills. He believes the skills of parents are inherited by their children, so he is here to prove once and for all that his dad is the best by beating Errol. But Errol calls him out on his BS because none of what he said made any sense. He's obviously just angry that Errol's mom can beat up his dad, and he's trying to take it out on him. But Errol is always down for a good challenge, so he accepts the duel. The duel begins shortly after, and the two start clashing blades with incredible speed. The other two boys watch on from the sidelines, and they are astonished by the fact that Errol is able to keep up with an intermediate swordsman like Redhead. After fighting for a few minutes, Errol can tell that Redhead is a lot stronger than the other two, but his anger is clouding his judgment, so after one wide swing, Redhead is left completely open, and he plans to take full advantage of that. He closes the distance and aims for Redhead's neck, but at the last second, Redhead uses one of his skills to counter. Errol manages to block the initial strike, but the second slash hits him in the gut and sends him flying into a brick wall. Redhead is surprised that Errol actually managed to block one of the slashes at such close range, but he still got hit in the end, so it's Redhead's victory. Errol asks for an explanation, so Redhead tells him that what he just used was called Twin Blade, and it is an attack skill that allows him to perform 2 strikes in one swing. He admits that Errol is way better than he thought he would be, and he respects him for it. But there's no way someone who is classless like him would ever be able to defend against a sword skill like that. However, Errol takes that as a personal challenge and swears he will find a way to overcome it. A few days later, Errol's sister comes into his room to wake him up, but he really isn't much of a morning person, so he just ignores her and goes back to sleep. However, Astaire then threatens to kiss him if he doesn't wake up, and that's enough to get him out of bed. They both head to the kitchen to grab some breakfast, and Astaire is still trying to kiss Errol, but his mom doesn't seem to mind since it's not incest if you're not blood related. However, in this case, those two really are blood related, so this is definitely incest. Once everyone has had their meal, Astaire asks Errol if he plans to go to his special training session again today, and he confirms it. But she doesn't understand why he has been pushing himself so hard lately. She tells him he should take a break every once in a while, but Errol doesn't plan on resting until he has become the best. So once he's done with breakfast, he heads out to continue his training. Astaire is starting to get really worried about him since he has been coming home late every day since he got beaten up at the training grounds, but Farah is sure that Errol is capable of taking care of himself, so there's no need for them to worry. She takes Astaire out back and shows her a chest full of broken swords. These are all the blades that Errol has been using to train, and you can tell by how worn out they all are that Errol is putting a lot of effort into getting stronger, so they should let him work as hard as he wants to. Meanwhile, out in the forest, Errol is using a tree to test out his new move since he thinks he has finally perfected it. He had to let the redhead hit him with it a lot so he could figure out how it works, but he eventually got it down, so he can use twin blade slash at will now. All this while, a goblin has been watching Errol from the bushes, and even though it just saw what Errol is capable of, it uses the logic of my ranked teammates and decides to attack him alone. Errol spots the goblin and easily slashes it across the chest before its body could even hit the ground. Just then, Errol hears the growl of a large monster somewhere else in the forest, and it sounds pretty big, so he's about to retreat to call for backup. But just as he is about to leave, he hears the voice of a kid being attacked by the monster. He doesn't have time to call for help anymore since it might be too late to save the kid by the time he returns, so instead, he charges forward to handle it himself. He eventually arrives at the spot where he heard the screaming, and he finds Redhead pinned up against a tree by a hobgoblin. He is severely injured, so Errol needs to save him, but he can't rush in carelessly since the hobgoblin is still a major threat. He patiently waits while the monster closes in on Redhead, and just as it's about to finish him off, Errol sees an opening, so he hits it with a twin-bladed slash, killing it instantly. Redhead is still badly injured, so Errol shares some of his standard issue holy water with him so he can recover. He feels a lot better now and thanks Errol for sharing his holy water, but now that that's out of the way, he demands to know how the hell Errol managed to do that. Twin Slash is a complex move that can only be achieved by using a skill. Errol admits that it definitely is complex, but all he needed to do was figure out the patterns and timing, and he was able to replicate it pretty easily. In fact, he should probably be thanking Redhead since it's only because he kept using it over and over that Errol was able to figure out how to perform the technique. Redhead can't believe it, but even if Errol was able to replicate the technique without a skill, he is still certain that his skill-based attack must be stronger, so he asks Errol to have another sparring match with him right here. The two face off against each other, and just as expected, Errol is able to match Redhead's twin slash. But not only that, he even goes a step further and throws in a third slash which catches Redhead off guard and knocked him off his feet. It's called twin slash for a reason, so it shouldn't be possible for him to launch 3 slashes at the same time. But since Errol isn't using a skill to perform the slashes, so there's no real limit on how many he can perform. Redhead is floored at the realization that Errol is simply better than him, and Errol walks away confident that he has asserted his dominance. A few days later, Errol is having dinner with his family, and Farah mentions that Evans's child has decided to go to Brescia, the city of swords, to train for some reason. Errol realizes he's probably the reason the Redhead suddenly decided to leave town for training, but the City of Swords sounds pretty interesting, so he is considering heading there as well. This was the end of episode 1. Subscribe to not miss the next part.